Welcome to the JOMA Preventative Health Podcast, hosted by the Jewish Orthodox Women's Medical Association. We provide you with up-to-date information on health topics geared towards the Orthodox Jewish community. This podcast content is provided for informational purposes only and is not intended as medical advice or as a substitute for the medical advice of a physician.
Welcome to the Jewish Orthodox Women's Medical Association, or JOMA podcast. I'm your host, Elisa Minkin. I am a general pediatrician and proud JOMA member, and I'm really honored and really excited to be interviewing Dr. Ellie Shapiro. Before I start, I'm going to remind people, please email me at health@joma.org if you have any topics you want to hear, or you yourself have a topic you're passionate about. Please email me. That would be amazing. I'd love to interview people who are passionate about their topics. And Dr. Shapiro is certainly one of those people who's passionate about his topic. I will apologize in advance. I had so much I wanted to cover, and we covered part of it. He has so much to say. He's really amazing. Dr. Shapiro, EdD, LCSW, is a licensed clinical social worker with a doctorate in education and specialist certificate in Jewish educational leadership. He is the creator and director of the Digital Citizenship Project, the digitalcitizenship.com, an adjunct professor for the City University of New York, and a trustee of the Queensborough Public Library. Dr. Shapiro is a graduate of the Azrieli School of Jewish Education and Administration, Wurzweiler School of Social Work, Touro College, and holds 2 licenses in school administration through the Queens College Postgraduate Educational Leadership Program. Dr. Shapiro has presented to thousands of parents, school faculty, and mental health professionals in communities across North America, and has lectured for internationally recognized organizations including Agudat Israel of America, Consortium of Jewish Day Schools, International Conference of Chabad Lubavitch Shluchim, Nefesh International, the Orthodox Union, Prisma, Center for Jewish Day Schools, Project Inspire, Torah and Sora, and Yeshiva University. He is an expert on the social and emotional functioning of families and leads numerous studies on Jewish families and technology. For more information, visit Ellie Shapiro at www.ellieshapiro.com, also www.thedigitalcitizenship.com. And also, the latest organization is KeterTech, KeterTech.org, that he mentions during this interview. Welcome, Dr. Shapiro. Thank you so much for joining me tonight.
Thank you.
I'm so excited to be having this conversation. I waited a long time for this. This is such an important topic, so I'm really, really excited to get going. I'm going to let you start just with talking about the digital citizenship program that you have created.
Yeah, so it's interesting. We started it in 2014, but its roots really started earlier than that. As you mentioned in the introduction, I'm a clinical social worker. I have a doctorate in education. My original work was on the social emotional literacy and functioning of kids in schools, and that naturally led me to bully prevention and promoting positive peer relations in school. And when I was doing my doctorate research, started in about 2010 or so, the whole idea of cyberbullying you started hearing in the news about cyberbullying. And so it was sort of a natural next step from a lot of the work I had previously done from traditional bullying into researching cyberbullying. And in that research, I started finding that the issues around technology extended far beyond what the communal dialogue was at the time. And when you're thinking about what was going on in the Orthodox community at the time, it was really focusing on the content of the internet and filters as a solution. And that's certainly a very important aspect of it. But a lot of the research I was looking at and my own research was finding that technology was impacting functioning as a whole. And it was just far beyond the content, but it was our social interactions and our how we communicated with one another and our relationships with other people, the social end, the psychological end, our how our relationship with technology impacted our subjective well-being and anxiety and impulsivity and compulsivity. So we have these social aspects, we have these psychological, we have these behavioral aspects that were being impacted, as well as the day-to-day functioning in our relationship with devices and with technology, it was far beyond the content. And really what I was, I guess, being confronted with on a communal level was the only focus at the time was content. And I would say now I think the dialogue is a much richer dialogue over the last 10 years, but certainly at the time it was limited. And so I kept getting asked to do these internet safety speeches, which was primarily people wanted to hear about, the content of the internet, the schmutz of the internet, and filters. And my whole approach was different, and my concerns were different. And so someone challenged me to say, well, you keep saying that there needs to be someone addressing this larger scope of issues. If no one's doing it, you should be doing it. And that's really where the Digital Citizenship Project emerged from, where we developed content for students, curriculum for students, faculty, professional development in schools, parent programming, and we decided to call it the Digital Citizenship Project. At the time, digital citizenship was a term I had started seeing in the research, and so we sort of adopted that. And now it's, I think, become a lot more part of the regular vernacular around technology. People do refer to digital citizenship, but that's really where the roots of the Digital Citizenship Project started. I often joke that when we started, it was 2014 and Barack Obama was president, and people thought it was a pathway to US citizenship using the internet. So it's digital citizenship. I think people are more educated now on what we're trying to accomplish.
What I think is fascinating is that with all that conversation about the content that we were having, like, in the Orthodox sphere, and the filters and the banning, aspect, it seemed to be that the religious world was worried about the internet and the secular world seemed to not be concerned about it. And I feel like now the secular world realizes, right, the non-religious, non-Jewish world realizes a lot of the challenges that we're facing.
So I think that there was concern. I think it was just different concern.
Mm-hmm.
There was more of in the Orthodox community, more of a moral imperative to address technology. And certainly the biggest challenge that they were seeing, Orthodox leadership was in the content domain. That was, the primary concern. I would say when you start moving towards the left and even to the secular, the non-Jewish world, there was always concern about the relationship with devices and its impact. I recall there was a video I watched. It was an interview. I forget who was being interviewed, but it was from the 1970s, and they were showing this computer, and the computer was the size of a room, and the person was predicting that one day everyone would have a computer in their home, and they would be able to pay their bills and order theater tickets and whatever it might be, all through their computer. And this is in the 1970s. And so the interviewer says to him, well, what would that mean in terms of social consequences if people are in front of these screens all the time? And it was like this brilliant interaction, this brilliant prediction of what the challenges might be. And I think there was always an awareness of it and an intuitive concern, but I don't think we had the research for it. Even 15 years ago, when I started doing my research, there was a very limited amount of data on cyberbullying and technology's relationship with human functioning. I mean, now there are journals dedicated just to that topic. But early on, I think intuitively there was concern. Similarly, intuitively there was concern in the Orthodox community about content. But I think now, and even now it's still early, we're going to look back in 10 years and 20 years and realize how much we don't know now. But certainly, I think intuitively it was there, and the research is really starting to bear out a lot of the concerns that we had. And, a lot of what I talk about, it's interesting. My message is exactly the same for my Orthodox and Jewish audience as it is for my non-Jewish audience. I'm actually speaking at a conference in a few weeks in Las Vegas for a non-Jewish audience. And I've spoken for numerous National Association of Independent Schools, Nearpod, Beluga, AccuTrain, all these other companies, and they're concerned about this as well. And when I get a smaller group of school administrators, it's great to hear their concerns, and they're all talking about the same issues that we're talking about. So I think the concerns were different. I think they were there across the board. But my focus had been the Orthodox community. And that was my backyard. And that was really what I wanted to address. And it was even more frustrating for me when I was just hearing, the only message I was hearing was about the content. And so therefore, my response to that was, okay, let's elevate the conversation, expand the conversation.
Right. And your program really doesn't address it from a religious perspective at all, right?
Yeah, no, not at all. The content is like 99% the same for my non-Jewish audience as my Jewish audience. I mean, as when you're speaking to any audience, you want them to feel comfortable with you as a presenter. So you're going to make references that are culture specific, but it certainly is not the basis of the content of the presentations.
Right. I just find it fascinating, though, because you ask pretty much anybody now what they think the cause of the mental health problems in children. We keep talking about the mental health crisis we're seeing in children and teens. And the first thing people usually say is it's the internet, it's, screens, which I think is, a vast oversimplification. But I think people do see that as a huge problem now. I don't think they saw that so much 10 years ago.
Yeah, I agree with both your statements. One is that, I guess three statements you made. One is that people do attribute all the ills of society to screens, as if there were no ills in society prior to screens. Two, I also agree that it's an oversimplification. And three, people were not talking about it in these terms 10 years ago. And really, there's longitudinal studies going on now that will really get a better understanding of it. But there's so much that's intuitive about it. And it's also a lot of its impact is unique to individuals. So we can make general statements based on the research that there is a relationship between anxiety and excessive screen time. Whether it's correlational or causal is not clear. It's probably a little of both. If you sit in front of a screen long enough, it's going to impact your mood. On the other hand, people that have anxiety, particularly social anxiety, are going to be more drawn towards screens and become more dependent on it. When you think about the social anxiety piece, one of the things that I talk a lot about is something called the online disinhibition effect, which was first identified by a psychologist named John Seller, I think in 2004 or so. So he was really ahead of his time. And he basically identified that people are less inhibited online, and they're more likely to do or say things that they wouldn't normally do or say in face-to-face conversations. And it relates to a relative anonymity, whether it's a pure anonymity using a fake screen name, or whether it's a relative anonymity just by the nature of the platform that you're using. People are still more likely to be less inhibited. So now if you take someone who suffers from social anxiety that is inhibited significantly in real world interactions, and you give them a device where they can formulate social connections. And so social connections are truly important for functioning. But if I don't feel comfortable in face-to-face conversations, but I can engage in these connections in a digital realm where I'm not feeling that anxiety, I'm going to become very dependent on that. And all the research on texting addiction supports that people that are identified as having texting addiction are much more likely to have social anxiety. Even there was a famous study in 2012 by Dr. David Pelkovitz, which ended up being called the Half Shabbos study, where they found that 12 to 18% of otherwise Sabbath observant teenagers were utilizing social media and texting on Shabbos. And they also found in that study that there were elevated levels of anxiety and social anxiety. So that's pretty consistent. So, the anxiety definitely contributes to the unhealthy relationship with technology. But additionally, we also know that excessive engagement with technology increases anxiety, because we know that when you start cutting back from your technology use, your anxiety lessens. So there is a little of both. And the most important piece is to understand that dynamic and understand the relationship. And it's also unique to the individual.
Right. I'm wondering what you're seeing since COVID started, because certainly COVID has ramped up anxiety, and depression in everybody, especially in kids. But it's also gotten us to do more screen time, not less screen time, for various reasons.
I mean, I could only guess like anybody else. We don't have the data on it to really make an informed statement. Is the elevated anxiety because of a global pandemic that had us with a tremendous degree of uncertainty? I would venture to say that's probably more of a contributing factor than the screens. Anxiety stems from, my colleague, Dr. David Rossmarin from Harvard. He ponders this question, and I love the way he presents it. I can never present it as well as him, but he ponders this question. He makes the point: we live in the wealthiest, most privileged society ever in the history of the world. We are the wealthiest, most privileged society. Any average person today lives a whole lot better than kings and queens of 500 years ago. I mean, I just talk about climate control. We have heat and air conditioning, nothing beats that. Yet we also have these incredibly high rates of anxiety. And so the way he explains anxiety is that it is our obsession with controlling all the variables. And that's really where anxiety stems from. And so COVID in particular, we spent all this time trying to control variables that were impossible to control. We just didn't know one day I can go to work, or I'm stuck at home for 2 weeks, or masks, no masks. Can I travel? Can I not travel? Do I need a vaccine? Do I not need a vaccine? Does the vaccine work? Does it not? Is it dangerous? Is it big farm? Like all these questions. Right. So even if someone had like the slightest inkling towards anxiety, this, knocked it out of the park. And yes, there's increased screen time. But there's I think two components that we need to think about. One is the way I describe the whole COVID thing is that it wasn't ideal. I think we can agree that it was not ideal. As a result, a lot of the decisions we made to manage and function during this non-ideal time may or may not have been ideal as well. So when we think about the excessive screen engagement, I kind of think, what would it have been like if we didn't have screens? Like how much worse would that have been if we were like home without the ability to connect with family and loved ones and do school online? Was it ideal to be on a screen 10 hours a day or 8 hours a day or whatever it was? Certainly not. But the alternative wasn't too good either. And so you have these competing issues around managing a global pandemic. And I'm sure we didn't get it right in many ways, but I'm sure we also got it right in other ways. That's one piece. The other piece is there's a misconception about what screen time is. And it always frustrates me when I see headlines that say screen time causes or screen time this. Screen time is not a singular thing. Screen time is a very complex process and with multiple layers to it. And I sort of divide it into 5 different categories, starting with consumption being the lowest level of screen time. So consumption is your Netflix binging, right? So that's when you just sit down in front of a screen and just 6 hours later, you've done nothing. And truthfully, when you get up from 6 hours of Netflix binging, you don't feel good. Your overall well-being, your subjective well-being is low. You don't feel good about yourself, your perspective, self-worth. You just don't feel good. So that's consumption, is the lowest level of screen time. The next level is something I call complementary, which is actually video game play. It's not an example of that, something that's more interactive than just that basic consumption. A lot of research prior to COVID and prior even to the internet on the difference between watching television and playing video games. And now, assuming that both for the television and for the video games, the content is non-violent, not graphic, just good, clean content, not anything that's depressing, just content. And what we find is that kids that play video games actually excel in a number of areas where the television watchers don't. They excel in problem solving, collaborative problem solving, multitasking, drowning out external noise, visual motor integration skills are improved. So there's something that's interactive with it, that there's benefit to it. And of course, like with anything, there's a point of diminished returns where, like, at some point you've gotten the benefit from the gaming, and then you're not getting that benefit anymore. Exactly how long that is, we don't know. What I recommend is that if you're 35 and living in your parents' basement playing Fortnite, you're probably past the point of diminished returns. I
think a little before then, but all right.
Yeah, it may have been earlier, but you're definitely there at that point. So that's so that complementary piece is clearly, and the research bears this out, is better than consumption. Yet they're both screen time. And then I'm just going to fast forward all the way up to the creative process with screens, which is synchronous learning and studying, interactive coding, graphic design, video editing, that creative process that we do with screens. That's clearly qualitatively different than consumption or even complementary. So when we talk about screen time, it always, to me, it's just like, well, we need to look at it a little more in a more sophisticated way. What do we mean when we say screen time? So the majority of the screen time that kids were on was mostly synchronous learning. There was some asynchronous learning. Some kids, interestingly enough, did better. So kids with social anxiety, actually, teachers reported that those kids did very well, primarily because of the online disinhibition effect. They were more participatory in class. They were more engaged in class. Kids with ADHD and asynchronous learning did not do well at all. They, just couldn't self-regulate and self-manage. So there are definitely aspects, that we've learned from, and we're still learning from the data. But to say that all screen time was created equal would be a false statement. And the other thing, is interesting. I had collected data from schools across the United States, yeshivas and day schools, prior to COVID. I don't use the data anymore because, as you've pointed out, COVID sort of changed everything. But one of the findings that we had was when kids self-reported about their own technology use, they were asked the question of how much time they spent on school-related work versus non-school-related activities on a screen. And the kids reported that they spent 50 to 100% more time on non-school related activities than school-related activities. So it's not the history homework that is really triggering the challenging relationships with technology. It's the all the other social networking, social media, excessive gaming, excessive consumption. Those are the areas that we want to be more concerned about, as opposed to just labeling everything screen time.
Right, that's really good. Can we talk a little bit about how people use the screens to self-soothe, and how people are doing that even with their youngest children? Maybe a little bit of that age of screen use, because I know that AAP says no screens till age 2. That is not happening. Right.
Yeah. One of the interesting things about research and science is that it's generally, we're espousing an ideal situation in a laboratory setting, and oftentimes it's just not reflective of the realities on the ground. But certainly awareness is key. So, the ability to self-regulate and self-soothe and self-care is something we talk a lot about, especially since COVID, is such an important skill, a coping skill in building resilience and grit in adults. And so one of the things that I frequently talk about in a more general sense is that technology has removed many of the opportunities for kids to develop resilience and grit. So I'll just give you, like, from an academic example. When I was a kid, if the homework assignment that I had for school required me to identify the distance from the Earth to the moon, how would I get that information? If I didn't have an Encyclopedia Britannica at home, I'd go down to the Brooklyn Public Library on East 16th Street and between I and J. And I would go in and I would go to a librarian, and she would direct me to the Dewey Decimal
System.
I'd have to figure out how to use that, pull the card, find the number, find the shelf where that is, get to it, find the book, find the page, get the information. So there's a lot of steps that go into
Google.
But today we just ask our phones and it will tell us that information.
Right.
So when kids today have homework assignments or papers or whatever it might be, the challenge of it, of gathering information and research is so much easier. And therefore, there are fewer and fewer opportunities to develop the resilience and grit in society today. So we as parents and as educators, we need to find more of those opportunities and make things just by design a little more challenging, to help kids develop that. But let's go back even further to what you're describing. For the preschool age. And it's funny, we tend to think of technology as an adolescent issue primarily, but it's so much more than that. And the technology is so much more impactful on the developing brain of 0 to 5 years old than it is on an adolescent brain. And so I found myself doing lectures exclusively for the early childhood community. The example I give, there's two real issues in the early childhood community in that critical stage of development. Issue number one is developing and creating dependence for the child on the device. And we do this, here's the example of where it's most profound and most impactful. When prior to cell phones, when a parent would take their child to a doctor and the child would get their vaccine. And I'm not making political statements, just the regular vaccines that we all know and love.
We're not saying COVID. No.
Right. The regular ones. So, the child would get the vaccine. The mother or the father would pick the child up, rub their back, make them feel good. And what is the child experientially learning through this process is that my parents are here for me. They love me. They can make me feel good when I'm in pain and when I'm hurting. And right, it's not a verbal expression. It's not a cognitive process. It's an experiential process, which is the most powerful, that child can experience. Today, when a parent takes their child to the doctor and the doctor gives them that shot, what do? They hand them their phone, and maybe there's a YouTube on or something that's distracting them. So what is the message that the child is learning? Is that a screen can help me regulate my mood. It can help me when I'm in pain. It can make me feel better when I'm sad. And they're learning this, again, experientially, which is the most positive, most powerful experiences. And it really imprints on them that experience. And it's very hard to unlearn that when it's been imprinted. Your first experiences in managing pain and frustration and stress and disappointment is a screen. And the truth is, it works. It works at that age. It distracts them, and it's very powerful. It
distracts us too, by the way.
Yeah, well, yeah, but we hopefully, and certainly at our age, we had our earliest experiences were not that of a phone or not that of a screen. So it was introduced later. So you can imagine if it was introduced later and it still has that powerful effect, how much more so it is on that critical stage of development of early childhood.
Right. But the point that I'm making is it is different for us, but our kids are also seeing us often use screens too much or use screens to self-regulate.
So that's the flip side of the coin. Mm-hmm. When that was, we're creating dependence on our kids. The next is, just contrasting adolescence with early childhood. If an adolescent sees their parents on their phone, it doesn't rock their world. Like, doesn't completely destroy them. Say, my dad's more addicted to his phone than I am. It's a cognitive experience for them, and it may have disappointment. There may be an emotional component to it. And there's the statistic that 6 out of 10 parents are concerned about their children's technology habits, but 7 out of 10 children are concerned about their parents' technology habits. I don't know if that's a real statistic, but you get the idea of that challenge between what parents are saying and what parents are doing. With that said, let's bring it back down to the early childhood experience again, where they don't have that cognitive process, that understanding of the technology. All they know is, all a 2-year-old knows is they're trying to get their parents' attention. They're trying to, make that connection, create that relationship, have that interaction, and they're not getting the feedback. They're not getting that empathy. They're not getting that facial connection, the physical connection, because the parent is on the phone, they're on the device. And that is so impactful. Again, contrasting it to a teenager, like, all right, they deal with it, and I'm not saying it's good, but just the utter devastation that a 2-year-old has experienced trying to get their parents' attention, and the parent is zoned out. There's actually a great study that was done. It's called the still face experiment. And if you Google the still face experiment, and you see the mother just stares at the child without any response and any reaction, you can see the stress and the suffering that the child is going through and trying to get that feedback, get that response. That's really what parents are doing with their phones and with their devices. So it's so important, twofold, especially in this early childhood age. Limit the, giving them the phone. It may be an easy fix, in the moment, but you're missing opportunities to formulate a much more meaningful connection with your child. And two, the other piece is it's so important to have time where you've put the phone away, that you're not distracted by it, and that you are completely and fully engaged with the child.
Absolutely. Did you see the children's book where the parent is on their phone the whole time things are happening and the kid's trying to get the parent to look?
I didn't see that. No.
There is a children's book. It's the saddest thing. It's really very sad. Okay. So this is all really important. And by the way, as a pediatrician, I'm seeing a lot of children who are showing more delays than I would expect. Like, I don't think developmental delays should be increasing. I can understand why anxiety would be increasing since COVID. I'm really wondering what's happening. I don't know. I don't want to speculate.
I think, look, in some ways, COVID was a blessing. In some ways, if you took advantage of it, in the early stages of COVID, I was interviewed, and, one of the suggestions I made is, what statements do you want to be able to make post-COVID? In 2 years from now, what statements are you going to want to be able to, are you going to want to say that you were, just on videos and stressed out? Or do you want to be able to say there were opportunities for family time that didn't exist before? One of the greatest gifts of COVID was I did not have for months on end the struggle of waking my kids up in the morning and getting them out of bed. That's a struggle for every parent. And all of a sudden I have an opportunity where they don't have to be out of bed by 7:00. It could be 9:00. And so all of a sudden that stress and that tension that starts the day was eliminated. Or even the idea of, for a number of weeks, we daven Kabbalah Shabbos at home as a family. When's that ever going to happen again? It was just an opportunity to have real, rich, quality family time in so many ways, if we took advantage of it.
Right.
Similarly, today, so we don't have those opportunities or challenges, but we do have different opportunities and challenges with the decisions we make around technology. And so one recommendation that I make for families, and something we do in my own home, is going dark for dinner, where there's no technology at the dinner table. At least 15, 20 minutes a night, it's just the family, no technology. And it's a remarkable thing. You find out about your children's day in school, you get some of the details you can share with them. It's almost like Shabbos. It's like amazing.
There are people who take technology Shabbos who aren't Jewish.
Yeah, no, I just heard Dr. Mark Rich. I think he runs the digital wellness center in the Boston Children's Hospital. He's also he's a Harvard professor who recommends a digital Shabbat.
He's Jewish, right?
Yeah, I believe he's Jewish.
I think he lives in Philadelphia, and he wrote a book. I think I started to read it.
I just attended a seminar by him, and he talked about it. And it wasn't the Jewish audience, but he talked about having a digital Shabbat. So.
Right. I want at the end to end with positive stuff. So I really want to go over all those little tips that you have on your website at the very end, if that's okay. Sure. So I'm going to go back to a little bit more of the challenges. Can we talk a little bit about communication challenges? I know this is part of your curriculum.
Well, let's call it miscommunication.
Right.
We often find that, look, we've all been there where we sent a text or a digital communication to someone and they completely misunderstood what we were trying to say, or vice versa, where we got something and we completely misunderstood what they were trying to say. And that really has to do with the research of Moravian, who identifies that 80% of communication is paraverbal, meaning it's not the words, it's everything else. It's the body language, the intonation, the volume, all of that contributes to communication. But the digital realm, all you have is the words itself.
And emojis. Don't
right,
forget emojis.
Yeah. So it's interesting though, because I don't think we have a standardized explanation of what each emoji is and when to use it.
Right.
So even at times, like there's the emoji where it's the smiley face with the heart eyes. Mm-hmm. So in my mind, that's sort of a romantic gesture that one might use. And that's how I see it, which was very strange when, my brother-in-law sent that to me and I was like, well, I don't know what that's about. But, even that, the standardized, there is miscommunication with emojis as well. And it creates issues. It's interesting because I just did a podcast for Yeshiva University's Connects, their dating program, and we were talking about dating in the digital age and how digital communication can artificially enhance relationships that might not be there. Disinhibition plays a role in it. Impulsivity plays a role in it. But miscommunication plays a role both in the positive and the negative. And when we also think of that, gender plays a role in how we approach technology. Women tend to use technology for social purposes and connectivity purposes, and men tend to use technology for entertainment purposes and utilitarian purposes. And so you can have people in a relationship where you're communicating, but your whole paradigm on the communication is completely different. And so miscommunication can certainly occur in those terms, but even when you're on the same page as far as that, or within the same gender, the language itself, how many times have we really misunderstood something? We have a group of friends, we go out to dinner every once in a while. And so we had this group chat. Someone said, okay, let's we'll make a reservation at whatever restaurant it was. And someone responded, it's all booked. And so it's all booked led to the question, well, is it all booked, we have a reservation, or is it all booked, we couldn't get a reservation? And that's like just a very innocuous example of how miscommunications can occur. When working with kids, we have a sentence that we put on the board, in how many different ways can you interpret this sentence. So it's something along the lines of, I did not tell David you were late to work today. So it could be, I did not tell David you were late to work today. I did not tell David you were late to work today. I did not tell David you were late to work today. I did not tell David you were late to work today. So like, you see how it goes. So really, depending on my perspective, how I'm reading it can be very different with your perspective on how you wrote it. And one of the things we try to do, certainly in the education standpoint, is one, recognize that we tend to be more impulsive when it comes to digital communication. So we sort of spit things out without really thinking. We also tend to be disinhibited. So that also impacts how we communicate and what we say. But we can also look at text and sort of perspective taking. Perspective taking is important in general, but certainly in the digital age, really looking at copy and looking at what you're writing and how it might be interpreted is a critical skill of digital citizenship, and navigating the digital realm and reducing some of the challenges and consequences that may come about.
Absolutely. I've heard that teenagers now have to go through two adolescences, one their physical one and one their digital one. And so I'm just thinking about all the things you're saying and how hard it is just to be a teenager and to, navigate the social norms, but to have to navigate it digitally too.
Yeah, it's really hard. Yeah, I don't envy teenagers today. And certainly, the research that came out of Facebook, or that was leaked from Facebook on social networking's impact specifically on adolescent girls. Again, girls tend to approach technology from a relationship standpoint, from a social standpoint. So its impact is that much more significant. And it's certainly something to be concerned about, how the constant barrage. We used to say about how magazines would influence body image and that perspective. I mean, that was, Larry, you get like once a month, you get a magazine, or, the overall media, maybe you see billboards. But today you're just inundated with content that impacts your paradigms, your perspectives, your self-worth, your self-identity. And not only that, it's compounded because the algorithms that are used to target you as an individual will be targeted with the same material that you spent a second and a half pausing on longer because something hit you in a certain way, and then you get more of it and more of it and more of it. And it really, it has an impact on people's well-being and subjective well-being.
Absolutely. And we haven't even gotten to cyberbullying yet.
Yeah.
Want to talk about that? A little bit. I want to make sure we get to your course. And I also want to talk a little bit about whether you give advice to parents in terms of when kids should have a smartphone. Can that be delayed? Does that make a difference? That's a lot of questions.
Yeah.
Okay. Which angle? Let's start with the age, because I meant to start with that.
Okay. So the longer you can postpone technology engagement, the better. I mean, the better off. It's okay. Kids can be bored. Boredom promotes creativity. The more we can postpone it, the better. The challenge with technology, as with other things, it's very much driven by social norms. And so if you're in a community where the social norm is that children are getting smartphones in 5th grade, it becomes very challenging to say no to your child. And eventually what ends up happening is the consequences of not giving them the device exceed the consequences of giving them the device. There are consequences either way. Right. This is something that parents need to accept with anything. Either way, we lose. There's consequences either way. And our job as parents is to choose the path with the least consequences. So we talk about social norms. I've had parents say, I don't care what's going on. My child is not getting a smartphone. And I say, okay, that's your right as a parent. But sometimes they want to argue. But you're saying that if everyone has it, my child should have it. I said, no, I'm not saying that. What I'm saying is you have a decision to make as a parent at that point, and assessing whether the consequences of giving it to them are worse than the consequences of not giving it to them. That will also play into the personality type of that child. There are some kids that even when everyone else has a phone, they just don't care. It's just not on their radar. They are busy with other things. They're probably less social than the kids that want the device. They might like doing puzzles or other things or reading, and that's fine. That's great. Postpone as long as possible. So because we know that it's the social norms that are influencing the drive for devices, our recommendation from a school standpoint and from a grade standpoint is, as parents, you can influence those social norms. When parents get together and say, okay, we're 5th grade parents, let's be real. Do our kids really need smartphones? No, they don't need smartphones. So let's agree as a 5th grade community, as a class, we're not going to, let our kids get smartphones. We'll revisit it again in 6th grade. All you have to do next year, sit down together and make that decision again. And there's a lot of schools that I work with that, they help facilitate this process. There's a great organization called Mothers Unite to Stall Technology. And they help parents facilitate this process of creating grade level standards, of devices. So maybe it's not devices, or maybe we agree that, it's eighth grade or it's ninth grade, and it's time, everyone needs devices. Parents need to be in touch with their kids. And I say the word need more from the parent's perspective than the reality. But they need to be in touch with their kids. So, but do they really need TikTok? Can we agree that no one should be on TikTok? But all of this is driven by the social norms. So the more that we can influence those social norms, the more control we're going to have as parents. Usually what happens is a child comes home and says, everybody is using Instagram. Everybody's on Instagram. And in most cases, it's not everybody. It's probably one or two kids. But as parents, you can control, if you put that effort in to control the social norms. And address it that way, utilizing organizations like MUST to help support that endeavor and that mission. It will make it easier. You don't need it. It just makes it easier. And working with a school community also is going to make that easier.
Right. That is really good advice. What about communities where the norm is not to use the internet at all? Are they home free? I'm just looking at it from the opposite perspective.
I think, what
I'm jealous of them. Okay.
Sorry.
I'm jealous. Okay.
No, I think the espoused values versus the reality may be in conflict. I can tell you that, having presented in different communities, even in some of the ultra Orthodox communities where there's an espoused value of no internet, in any given class, you might have, I'll just give an example. I had, and this goes back about 5 years ago, so it's obviously worse now, a very ultra Orthodox school in a very ultra Orthodox community. The fifth grade Rebbe came over to me and said, legitimately, half of his class does not have internet at home, do not have smartphones, no gaming systems, like nothing. They really have absolutely nothing. However, the other half of the class has something, whether it's a parent smartphone that the kids are using, or even internet or a computer in the house. So it really becomes, that just really means that the other half has access as well. And in a lot of these communities, they're not talking about it because, we have a policy, no internet. And so therefore, that's the beginning and the end of the conversation. They're not going to talk about responsible ways of using technology because the policy is no technology, no internet. So I don't know how prevalent it is that there are communities that really legitimately don't have any internet. I think you have a lot of individuals that don't have, and they're probably living richer,
right,
better, lives socially, psychologically, behaviorally, spiritually. It's a wonderful thing. It's amazing to be able to do that. My two oldest daughters, one is 19 and one is 22. Neither of them have smartphones.
Wow.
Yeah, they made it, and they grew up in 5 towns with smartphones. And it's always been part of the conversation in our house. And they made a decision at some point in seminary in Israel that they functioned better without smartphones. And yes, it has times where it's incredibly inconvenient, both for us as parents and for them as individuals, but that's the sacrifice that they've chosen to make for a higher quality of life in their perspective. So I think that's amazing. And when people can do that, I think one doesn't have to completely eliminate the technology from their lives to elevate their practice with technology, but really to self-assess. What do they call it in Alcoholics Anonymous? A fearless moral inventory. So people need to take a fearless inventory of their own technology habits. And a fundamental question that people need to ask themselves on a daily basis, or even multiple times a day, is technology serving as an enhancement in my life, or is it serving as an intrusion in my life? And then making decisions to have it lean more towards enhancement rather than intrusion. And one of the ways I do, and I do this exercise myself, and this is going back to what we talked about, the word need. What do I want versus what do I need? And being able to make that distinction, sometimes it's hard to assess that, but what do I want versus what do I need? And then the next question is, what do I need portable versus what do I need access to? So I was finding personally that I was getting more and more notifications and pop-ups, and to me, it was just a distraction. And like every time you hear that extended ding that just sort of hangs there, my anxiety always went up. So I sat down with my phone and I started saying, all right, what do I want? What do I need? And what do I need portable? So some of the things that I found that you need to be portable, Waze needs to be portable. It doesn't really work well on a desktop computer. So that's something that I needed on my phone. Then I was looking at Twitter. Do I need Twitter? Well, okay, I need Twitter because I use it for communication, but do I need it portable? All right, let me get that off of my phone, right? So these are decisions that we have to look at and see really where is it enhancing and where is it intruding. I am going to confess, I did put Twitter back on my phone, mainly because I was missing out on dance deals, which
that's important.
Yeah. So
that needs to be portable.
So, but what I did was I set it up that the only notifications I get were from dance deal. So, that's the thoughtful and deliberative approach we need to take with technology in order for it to be an enhancement rather than an intrusion. For most of us, we approach technology without thought and without strategy. And I think probably that's the most important. Like if there's one piece of information recommendation, it's not about a specific app, or it's not about a specific phone or internet, no internet. It's just all of this, be thoughtful and deliberative about it. And whether how it's raising our kids or for ourselves, that's the key, is to really be thoughtful and really see how is the technology impacting, my functioning.
Right, and you're setting an example for your kids. So I want to get back to, because I want to know your thoughts on filters and parental controls.
They're good. They should have them. I mean, when I expanded on the communal dialogue a number of years ago, it was not in contrast to filters and parental control software. It was in addition to.
Right.
But the truth is, some of the earliest research that I did, where we compared different groups, we compared two groups. I'm not going to label them for public consumption, but we had probably about 2,000 surveys completed by parents, and they were asked to self-identify their affiliation within the Orthodox community. And so one group, however they identified, they had double the rate of device ownership. This is amongst the kids, double the rate of device ownership, double the rate of social media, and half the rate of filters. Let's call that group A. And then group B had half the number of devices amongst kids percentage-wise, half the level of engagement in social media, and double the rate of filters. Okay, so these are our two groups. When we compared the two groups with the following question, we asked this to the kids. Do you look up websites that your parents would disapprove of? So obviously we thought that the group with the more devices, more social media, and half the rate of filters would look up, would have a higher rate of reporting, looking up websites their parents would disapprove of, because they had more, what do they call it with crime? It's motive and opportunity, So
right.
They have motive and they have opportunity. So you'd think it would be higher. And what we found was that it was the exact same rate, percentage of kids that reported looking up websites that their parents would disapprove of. Some of your audience, I know it's a sophisticated audience, they're going to say, well, qualitatively, the two groups are different. And that is true. Qualitatively, what one parent group would approve of would be different than what the other parent group would approve of. But at the end of the day, we have the same rate of kids knowingly engaging in behavior that moves away from their communal norms. That's what we're looking at, the departure from communal norms. And so what we found was that the filters in and of themselves were not effective in reducing the type of behavior that it was designed to reduce. It could be the frequency was reduced, but it was not reducing the behavior. But when we took those same two groups and we asked, do your parents speak with you about safe and responsible ways of using technology? And we asked them, are there set rules and guidelines in your house around technology? When kids answered yes to those questions, it significantly reduced the likelihood that they were going to go on websites that their parents would disapprove of. So it was the filters and the parental management in addition to the education and the guidance and the leadership on behalf of the parents. So you have to have filters, you have to have parental control devices, primarily because it's a physical manifestation of whatever the parental values are. But if you're not communicating the parental values, then it's almost as restrictive, and kids, you're imposing on their autonomy.
And they will win.
Yeah. There was actually a study, and this is really where I forget the professor's name. It was at the University of Haifa, where he actually found that kids were getting into more trouble. And I know I'm not operationally defining that term, but kids were more problematic behavior of kids that had filters on their phones and kids that didn't have filters on their phones. I was astounded by this. I thought this can't be right. I actually emailed the professor. We went back and forth a few times, and he did concede that it could be slightly different in Israeli culture, where there's a high degree of independence, and anytime that independence is pushed on by teenagers, they do push back. But in more and more of my work in the United States, I'm finding that the desire for autonomy is pretty consistent, and if it's not approached in a educational way and in a empathetic way and in a validating way to kids, then you're likely going to not have as an effect the effect that you want, the outcome that you want, by just putting filters and devices. I get the question, should I just put filters and management software without telling my child, or monitoring software without telling my child? And I strongly discourage that. It's really about the relationship. It's about the communication. And just from a pragmatic standpoint, what's going to happen if you find something that you don't approve of? You're not going to tell your child that, oh, we've been spying on you, and there's no trust. So I strongly discourage that. It should be part of the dialogue. It's part of the, if you're old enough and mature enough to have a device, we are going to help you along by managing it. And it's not just about the content filters. It's about shutoff times. It's about maximum, doses of screen time per day. It's setting all of that up so that your child can, again, maximize what technology has to offer and avoiding and minimizing and mitigating some of the inherent challenges that go along with it.
Absolutely. You know what? We have like 3 times the amount of material that we can cover today. So I'm going to leave out all the cyberbullying related topics and just maybe summarize, end on a high note of what parents can do. And also, we didn't even really go into all the things you do with your programs, but maybe we'll just say where people can find you at the end, and then they can, because it's very, very thorough information on your website. Is that okay with you?
Yeah, that's fine.
Okay, because we could be talking for 3 hours.
At least. I could go all day with this.
So much information, and it's so important. But I think it's important to say that if parents are thinking, oh my gosh, like that's great, I'm supposed to do this, I'm supposed to do that, but I don't know how, you have a lot of resources.
Yeah, I primarily focus on school communities rather than individual parents. I think that if you really want to have an impact, because children live in the school environment, they spend more hours a day there than anywhere else. And that's really what's going to influence their drive for technology and their habits and their norms. It's so important to approach this on a school-wide level. So what I love doing is coming out to a school community and speaking to parents and hearing the concerns and helping them develop a communal strategy. In fact, we started a new organization called Keter. It stands for Kahila Technology Education Resources. And what the drive for that was, well, I did start Digital Citizenship Project almost 10 years ago, what I found was that there were a handful of individuals and other organizations that sort of emerged over the last 10 years that were addressing slightly different aspects of the technology space. And in order for schools and parents to have a really meaningful intervention or strategy, it really required multiple entities, not just Digital Citizenship Project. So we started Keter. The website for Keter is ketertech.org, Keter, TECH.org. And the idea was to take these entities and work with school communities and assess where their needs are, and then create a comprehensive technology strategy utilizing, it could be the Digital Citizenship Project, it could be MUST, it could be Project Focus out of Chicago, Project Trust, K-Phone. So these are all entities that we work with. JEDIT, the Jewish EdTech IT group, that helps schools with even their Chromebooks. One of the challenges we were hearing from parents is, the school has all these policies on personal devices, but they're handing out Chromebooks that gives them more access than their personal devices. So helping schools really identify what their philosophy around technology is, and then really all the way from devices to behaviors, really providing them with the resources, the organizational resources to help them succeed as a school community. So that's really, in the last year, we created Keter, and we've been seeing really great results from that, working with schools around the country.
That is amazing. The last resource is JEDIT, something.
JEDIT, Jewish EdTech and IT. It's a division of the Consortium of Jewish Day Schools.
Cool. That is amazing. And then ketertech.org. Remind me again what that does.
So that's a website for schools to it really just see what the resources are. They can reach out to Keter, and we help them develop a comprehensive technology strategy. So it's not just about the education. I'll be honest with you, I'm not an expert on filters and filtering devices or device management. I'm not a technologist. So I can bring people through Keter. We can have experts in that arena. We can have MUST, organizing, grade level consensus building. And then Digital Citizenship Project can do the education and the student education. The idea is to really take a holistic, comprehensive approach to addressing technology, as opposed to the piecemeal approach where maybe I get filters and but I don't do the education. Or maybe I don't do the education, but I don't have the filtered resources. Or maybe I do the education, but I didn't build grade level consensus. So the idea was to put this all under one easy to access portal for schools and ultimately parents and a school community.
Now, how does that differ from your programming, your curriculum that you have? It's called TechSmart.
Yeah, so TechSmart is the name we gave the curriculum and the actual programming that we do with students and with faculty. So it's a piece of it. Keter is sort of an umbrella. We took 6 different existing organizations and then put them under one umbrella. So a school, in the past, if I were working with a school, it would be under Digital Citizenship Project. We would do a parent program. We would do the curriculum. We train faculty, school faculty, in doing education modules with students around areas like impulsivity and disinhibition and miscommunication, resilience and grit and mindfulness and all these miscommunication, all these other topics. And so we train, we have a train the trainers model where we train faculty to then do workshops with the students throughout the year. But that doesn't necessarily change the parental culture, right? It doesn't necessarily address the pragmatics of filtering devices. It doesn't necessarily help the school establish what their ed tech values are when it comes to technology. So they can do a whole host of educational pieces, but have they guided their teachers, or have they established that homework assignments do or don't require the internet? And if they do require the internet, what sort of mechanism or platform have we set up where students have the information available to them, but are not going to be distracted by other content or other distractions of the internet? So what are we doing to again, maximize what they can do with technology and avoid those challenges. And so what Keter does, where it really expands from what just digital citizenship does, it just expands. It's a much more comprehensive strategy for schools.
That's amazing. So let's just end on what parents can do right now. We talked about some of it already. We talked about filters. We don't have to go through that again. But you have a whole list. It's on your website, on the Digital Citizenship website. There's a whole page of ideas. Maybe you could just pick a few of them and not go through all of them. I don't have the list
in front of me.
I have the list in front of me.
Remind me what it says. I mean, I can tell you what I think some of the most important are, but
yeah. I mean, let me just give the categories. There's model responsible digital engagement.
Yeah,
which you talked about before.
Yeah, so that is really the parental role. Parents are the number one influence on what kids think is appropriate and responsible when it comes to technology and anything else. By the way, we've been talking about technology, but everything as a parent, it's the same rules.
Right.
You know, whether your child's crossing the street or going to the store on their own, we always have to assess, you know, the consequences of action versus the consequences of inaction. You know, and that goes into it. Just because it's the communal norm, am I going to go along with it? What happens if I don't? What happens if I do? So being thoughtful and deliberative plays a role in it. But even more than you know, telling our kids what we expect of them, it's modeling what we expect of them. That doesn't mean that you need to be embarrassed to use your phone. It just means be transparent about it and say, oh, I have a client I have to get back to, and then I'm all yours. Or I need to respond to this text. And then I'm going to put my phone away and we're going to spend some quality time together. So that's modeling. Modeling doesn't mean not using technology. Modeling means showing kids how you use it appropriately. And so, you know, we have these opportunities all the time to demonstrate for our kids and be transparent about it. We tend not to be. We tend to, you know, just either do it or you know, but in order for us to inculcate values into our kids, we have to be transparent and communicate that. So that's really what modeling is about. And again, parents are the number one influence. Sometimes it doesn't feel that way for parents, but consistently when we ask kids, you know, give them a list of who the biggest influences are, consistently parents end up being the number one.
Right, and they're watching us every second.
Yeah.
They're watching what we actually do. So that is actually very important. We have promote healthy social interactions here.
Yeah. So, you know, oftentimes parents understand either intuitively or they came to a speech and they're riled up and like, okay, no more technology. You can't just get rid of technology. You have to provide alternative opportunities for kids to have, you know, things to do outside of technology. You can't just say no technology. So finding what your kids' interests are. So some kids are into sports. Some kids are into reading. Some kids are into hanging out with friends, but also limiting it without the technology. We need to promote those activities. So one example is I recently spent an obscene amount of money on a hockey stick for my son. Way more than I would have ever expected a hockey stick to cost. But he's interested in hockey. And if I get him the stick, it means he's going to spend that much more time outside playing hockey. So we need to invest both in our time as parents and monetarily in helping our kids, supporting their interests. I have another child who's a piano player. She loves playing piano. And it is amazing to me how much piano teachers make on an hourly basis. They do pretty well, and there's no malpractice insurance. So
I need a new career. All right.
Yeah. No third-party reimbursement and no malpractice insurance. So they're doing pretty well. But why do we pay the piano teacher? Because it's an activity that is non-computer based. It's not screen based. So we need to support that. Also, as parents. You know, I'm like any other parent. I like sitting on the couch and just, you know, doing nothing. So on this past Thanksgiving, when my son said to me, let's go to the park, to the roller hockey rink, and it's my day off from work, my initial reaction is, oh, I don't want to go anywhere. I just want to sit on the couch. But the answer is, as a parent, we sort of signed up for this long-term contract that we're in. And it just means that, you have to get up and go do those things. So that's what I mean, providing alternative, non-digital activities, social activities, finding your children's interest, understanding what that interest is, and finding those opportunities. Additionally, another thing, it doesn't mean that it's all going to be that. Your kids are going to play video games sometimes. They're going to watch, shows sometimes. And you can share that experience with them. And then you're taking it from an exclusively, individualized digital activity to a shared experience where the medium happens to be a digital activity. So my son, who likes to play hockey, also likes to play video game hockey. So we will play video game hockey once in a while. And he beats me every time. It's like not even close. He's just better at it than I am. But it's a shared experience. And we talk about, remember that goal you scored off me in the game, so it becomes a shared experience. So one is we want to have more opportunities for non-digital activities, social activities, and promoting their interests outside of technology. But even within technology, we can elevate the technology engagement by having it become a shared experience as well.
I'm going to throw in a little pediatric thing here, in that if you do see that your child doesn't have any other interest and they are spending all their time in technology, then may be a sign of a mental health issue that you need to address.
Yeah, if you can't find anything that your children are interested outside of that, we're talking about demonstrating a high degree of dependence. That would be of concern. But another thing, by the way, you sort of, I guess it's the flip side about what age is the right age to get a phone. Is what is the right amount of time in front of a screen, whether it's consumption or creative. It's not that there's never a time for consumption. There are times to sit down and just, and veg out. There are times for that. The question is, at what point is it problematic? And the answer is really it's individualized. The DSM-4 used to have something called Global Assessment of Functioning, and DSM-5 doesn't have it. I don't know why they got rid of it. But when we look at our kids, we have to do a global assessment of functioning. Just look at their whole experience. I'm a lot less concerned about someone, even consuming too much Netflix when they are doing well in school, when they have a social life, when they are active, when they're doing things. I'm a lot less concerned. And I'm even more concerned about a minimal amount of consumption or complementary video game play when they're academically failing and when they're, engaged in, they're not engaged socially and they're introverted to the point of, they just don't communicate and their affect is. So we have to look at their overall level of functioning, and that also will guide us when it comes to technology as well.
Right. So you had a couple of the things. You had dialogue, real conversations with active listening and non-judgmental responses, which is, I think, self-explanatory. No?
So,
you think about that?
It is. I don't know. It's a lot of things that I think are self-explanatory. Need explaining. So a few things happen. When it comes to dialogue, and I do this exercise with every parent audience that I've ever spoken to across multiple countries and hundreds of cities. And the response is always exactly the same. The exercise I do is like this. I always say that if my public speaking career didn't work out, I would become a mentalist. And a mentalist knows what you're thinking. And I'm going to say something and you're all going to respond in unison. And if I'm correct, if my mentalist skills are correct, you will see whatever it is you said on the screen behind me. And so I follow up with, your child comes home from school and you say, how was your day? And they respond, and I do my magic mentalist hand move like this. And how was your day? And the audience says either good or fine. And that's what I have on the screen. And I say, well, the really good parents in this room, you won't let your children get away with a good fine. You will follow up with the ever important question of what did you do today? And usually they say nothing is what we get from most. Stuff is actually a level up from nothing. So you must have a great relationship with your kids. But usually get nothing. And that's that disingenuous dialogue that we have all too often with the kids. What did you do today? How's your day? Fine. What did you do today? Nothing. Where's the iPad? That's the conversation. So a genuine dialogue is really, tell me about your day. It's open-ended questions. It's like, what was going on at lunch today, or what was happening in science class today? Something that they have to expand on. And that promotes more of a meaningful, rich dialogue, including giving you the opportunity to actively listen. Another thing that parents can do is to share about their day. And I'll sometimes say, like, oh, I'm so glad you asked, even if they didn't. Let me tell you about what happened at work today, and share with them. And really, it's promoting that dialogue, promoting that relationship. So then when it comes to more complicated conversations like technology or substance abuse or healthy decision-making, the mechanism for dialogue has extended beyond the one-word answers.
Right. Yeah. So there's 2 more parts to this, besides limit screen time, which we talked about, and install filters, which we talked about, which is using digital items in public places. You have it here. A computer should be set up in a public place.
Oh.
Doors must be kept open. Phones and internet activity should be regularly monitored. I think that's important.
Yeah. So as when you said public place, for some reason, I'm thinking about the mall.
I'm sorry.
Yeah. No.
Only computers in the mall. The Apple Store.
Yeah. So the idea is to have policies and rules and recommendations. So we know from our research that when there are clear expectations and rules, the results are better. So it's almost secondary what those rules are. We give these as examples. So computers being utilized in a public place, or the door to your room being open, those are just examples of rules and guidelines. We think it's good practice. It's almost less about, if you have your child on a filtered device in their room and the door is closed, I mean, they're not going to get into too much trouble, but just establishing an expectation that there's a time for technology and there's a way to use technology. By establishing those rules, you're going to be in a better situation for the communication, for the dialogue, for the outcomes around technology. Other examples we give, and we didn't touch on it, and I think it's so important, is the impact that technology has on sleep. Harvard did a study where they had individuals read from an e-reader and read from a book. It was the same content at bedtime. And what they found was, and you don't have to have gone to Harvard to figure this out, when you read a book at bedtime, it puts you to sleep. Perhaps before prescribing, Ambien, just a good book, and see if that helps. And they found with an e-reader, it actually inhibited quality sleep. It made it harder to fall asleep. The quality of the sleep was different. And so based on that recommendation, we tell parents to not let your kids be on devices half hour, 45 minutes before bedtime. So maybe that's a rule, So the idea is it's not specifically about the public places, because the expectation is that the devices that your children are using are monitored or filtered or regulated. So it's not about a privacy thing per se, but it's about creating rules and establishing rules. And also, when it comes to technology engagement, if it's a public activity, it's more social, in and of itself. So you might be sharing, oh, look at this thing that I'm looking at, a funny video or something like that. Similar to when a parent is playing a video game with their kid, it takes it out of the realm of that individual myopic, stuck with just the screen, to more of a communal activity. But that's one example of rule. So it's not the public per se. It's just examples of policies that you might have. Could be going to, no devices half hour before bedtime. It could be no devices the first 30 minutes home from school. It could be going dark for dinner is another example of it. So those are just some of the strategies that we recommend to have clear rules, guidelines, and expectations when it comes to technology in the home.
Right. I thought you were talking about having it in a public place also for a safety reasons, which we did not get into. And honestly, internet safety, we didn't touch upon it the entire talk. We had a whole talk about digital citizenship, and we didn't mention any of the dangers. So that's going to have to be a separate episode with somebody, maybe you. But I do want to mention one more thing that's at the very end of this, which is supervising, and it's also related to sleep. I think I saw a statistic on your website about how many kids sleep with their phone under their pillow.
I think it's about 77%, something like that. It's having devices within reach. So what we found was it was in the high 70s, if I recall correctly, of kids that have devices sleep with them within reach. And that goes back to the sleep issue. And most kids will say, why do they need the device? They need it for an alarm clock. They don't need it for an alarm clock. They can have an alarm clock, like you don't.
They still make those?
Yeah, they still make them. We have near my house, we have something called Amazing Savings. But I think any Dollar General or anything like that, they still sell the alarm clocks. I know it's a little hard to set the clock. You have to hold this button down and push other buttons.
So much work.
But they don't need it for an alarm clock. And going back to setting expectations, my kids can quote the Harvard study to you because I tell them, they can't have their phones, next to their beds at bedtime. And so, one of the things parents can do is using device management software, have the phone shut off at a certain point of the evening automatically. It takes away the push and pull. But kids should, have to bring their devices to their parents at a certain point of the evening. It's teaching them responsibility. And that just becomes part of the regular routine within the house.
When my kids were younger, we used to shut off the Wi-Fi. No one had Wi-Fi. Just went off magically.
Yeah. Look, there are so many ways of utilizing technology today to make this easier. I happen to recommend Apple products. Primarily because I'm a shareholder, but in addition to that, I just find them to be the most intuitive and easy for parents to manage. It doesn't mean it's foolproof. You have to know what you're doing when you're setting up devices. There are YouTube channels for that to figure out how to do that. Setting that up. It's to a degree, there's opportunity to just set it and it's pretty much going to stay, how it is, unless you didn't set it up properly. So.
Right. But I really love that you look at this from all the different angles, because I really do think that it takes a village. It can't just be on the parents' shoulders to control their kids. It's not going to work. So I think that your programs are amazing. How can people find you?
Well, they can go to kettertech.org. They can go to ellishapiro.com. They can go to the digitalcitizenship.com. All of those would have access to my work.
That's really, really amazing. I hope you let me interview you a second time, because we literally only covered some of the material. There's so much to talk about. And I really, really appreciate you taking all this time to talk to me.
My pleasure.
All this great information. Thank you so, so much.
Thank you.
Thanks for listening to the JOMA Preventative Health Podcast. If you've enjoyed this, please rate and review us on Apple Podcasts and share this with your friends. For more information, check out our Instagram at JOMA_org. Check out our website, www.joma.org, that's JOWMA.org, or email us at health@joma.org.